Okay, so you are currently on the Mount of Olives, exactly. In terms of direction, you are in which direction from the city of Jerusalem? East. Okay, so you've got the Judean desert wilderness to your back, and you've got the whole city laying out in front of you. Between the Central Valley and the Kidron Valley is this narrow city of David. You can see it. It's part of it is behind this olive tree here, but it cascades downhill to the point where we reach the Pool of Siloam, all the way at the end of the city of David. On the front end, on the north side of the city of David, you have the Temple Mount. It's an addition to the city of David made by Solomon. It's on the northern end of the city of David. That's the reason we have the psalmist saying, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God and the mountain of His holiness." Beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. So he's not just bragging on his capital city, the psalmist here is bragging on God. It is God that makes beautiful for situation. It's the presence of God that makes beautiful. It's the presence of God, by the way, in our lives that makes us beautiful, and I'm thankful for that because it's my only hope of glory. All right, do you see the city, do you see the wall that encases Jerusalem and the Temple Mount? Okay. The bottom parts of that are Maccabean. Herod added to it, and then it's been added on top of even after the destruction by the Romans in 70 AD. In front of you, you see what is called the Southern Steps. This is where the majority of people entered the Temple Mount through two subterranean tunnels that have you coming up on to the Temple Mount about where that first grove of trees exist. That's the Mosque of El-Aqsa on the southern end, and that's where Solomon's palace would have set back in first temple days. The Dome of the Rock is at least approximately where the Temple of Solomon, the rebuilt Temple of Ezra, Nehemiah, Sheshbazzar, Zerubbabel, Haggai, Zechariah set. And then in Herod's day, he beautified and rebuilt that temple block by block. Okay, so it's set in the same place as the one of Ezra and Nehemiah. You see the city of Jerusalem laying out behind the Temple Mount, right? And we were in the old city where all of those smaller, lower, closer together buildings were yesterday. And then if you go all the way to the far end, you begin to see skyscrapers and more modern buildings, and that's going to be, quote, West Jerusalem. So you have Old City inside the city walls, is what we call it today, and then you have Newer Jerusalem continuing to build further, largely in the direction of north, west, and south. All right? We were way up here. If you see the tower in the distance, we were in that area of Benjamin, where Judah's border was basically the city of Jerusalem. That's kind of almost a neutral zone. Jerusalem, Jebus, was between Judah to the south, Benjamin to the north. But we were up on the central Benjamin plateau when we were up on King Hussein's palace. Remember that at Gibeah? We were overlooking the central Benjamin plateau, and we talked about the wilderness. We talked about going on all points north like Shiloh and Shechem, where we'll visit tomorrow, and then connecting over to Gibeon, the Ajalon, that fourth western approach coming up off the coast. We did 3 yesterday. The fourth one we did this morning, kind of, sort of, because it's over behind Nebi Samuel. And it cascades down through the Shephelah and then into the coast going west. If you went from that sole building that was on that top of that more or less barren hill, Nebi Samuel or Mitzpah, all right? So those are kind of your best coordinates. We were in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre yesterday. Can anybody pick that out?
Yeah, silver top.
If you go past the Dome of the Rock, you got to be on the left of the Dome of the Rock. Go further uphill until you come to 2 gray domes, one of them smaller, the other one's larger. The smaller one first and then the larger one right behind it. Yep, that's Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
You see the steeple, looks like a bell tower to the left of there. That white kind of steeple is to the left of those. Look to your right.
That's correct.
Look to your right of that, and you can see them. They're gray.
Yeah, that is correct.
And David's original is where, Wade?
I'm sorry, David's city?
Original, King David.
You have to go south or left of this road where all the traffic is. A couple of buildings down, we stood on top of the roof of one of those buildings on the left side of the road. And the city of David cascades down this way and ends over here behind these two olive trees.
It's right across from the southern steps there.
It should be easy enough if you want to take a picture of it, and I want to encourage you to do it, and I'll help you with it if you come down here after we've broken up because you can't see it. I don't think you can. Can you see up over that tree?
No, I can't.
All right.
Probably walk them up there.
Yeah, you should be able to see it from there. There's another thing that I would like to point out, not here, but over there, and that's that you can see the Herodian from here. Let me see if I've got time for this. Yes, I do. All right, in Matthew chapter 21, Jesus is coming from Bethany, which is over behind us. It's on the backside of the Mount of Olives. We're on the southern end now, so we're just over the precipice, the horizon line from Bethany. So Jesus comes from Bethany and he walks from Bethany up the ridge line to Bethphage or Beit Pagi, and there he curses the fig tree. You know about this, Matthew 21 territory. All right, and they come back later and the fig tree is withered. And it says that the disciples marveled, and Jesus says, "You think this is something? Truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed," now he's talking agriculture, "then you can say to this mountain," now he's talking geography, topography, geology. "You can say to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea." What is he talking about? People have suggested all kinds of interpretations on this. Here's mine. Here's the way I would suggest, because it ties into land and culture. So the mustard seed is the smallest of all the seeds, and we've seen mustard plants in full bloom growing, right, already. Whole fields of those. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives up at Beit Page. He can see from there, we can see from here, the Herodium. In the Babylonian Talmud, it says in Tractate Bava Batra around page 3b, they're having a discussion about Herod the Great, his pros and his cons, positive things and negative things about Herod the Great. One of the rabbinic sages says, "You know, if royalty will say unto a mountain, be uprooted from your place, then it shall be uprooted and shall not return to its place." So already in ancient times, they're talking about Herod's building of the Herodium. That's what he's talking about, where he literally took part of a mountain up off of its place of origin, stacked it on top of the mountain right beside it, and you saw this. You saw the volcanic mountain, and you saw the cut off, the flat mountain right beside it. And then, after that, built a gigantic fortress with a palace inside on top of that mountain on top of a mountain. Jesus is saying, if you, as sons and daughters of the great king, if he can do that, and he's just an earthly guy, godless guy, outside the kingdom, not obedient to God, then by the power of God working inside of you, that is initiated through your trust in him, biblical faith is placing your trust in God, then there is no limit to what can be done by the person submitted to the will of God, member of his kingdom. I don't think it's about overthrowing Jerusalem. I don't think his point of reference is the Mount of Olives. I think he's standing at Beit Pagi and he said, you can say to that mountain, just like Herod did, but in an even greater, more effective way, because God's power is behind you. Faith the size of a mustard seed, not some gigantic spiritual giant, not some guru who has all the formulas right. But if you've got faith the size of a mustard seed, because this is the nature of biblical faith. It's not about us. It's about Him. And so it's not about the size of our faith. It's about the greatness of our God, who is able to do things above and beyond all that we can ask, dream, think, imagine, plan, strategize, network into reality. How great is our God? Garden of Gethsemane. You and I are sitting in the compound, the modern day compound of the Garden of Gethsemane. The Church of All Nations behind us, the old city of Jerusalem in front of us across the Kidron Valley. You can see the wall, the eastern wall of both the Temple Mount and the old city, right? Down here you can see that those blocks at the bottom are bigger than the blocks at the top near the corner. That's a part of the ancient wall that goes back to, some of this goes back as far as Maccabean times, before King Herod the Great. Over here to right in front of me, for some of you this tree is in the way, but right in front here is what we call the Golden Gate. Not exactly sure where that name comes from, but the ancient names for that are Eastern Gate or Shushan Gate or Gates of Mercy. So it's a gate that goes again by about 4 different names at least. That's the Eastern Gate of the Temple Mount. Inside of that would be the Court of the Gentiles, and then even further inside that would be the more narrow holy place. The Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus comes here the night that He is betrayed, yes? That basically marks the spot for the rest of human history. The church is built over a top of a part of the Mount of Olives, and presumably also a part of that Garden of Gethsemane. Inside there are signs, and they'll direct you to a place that is an outcropping of stone, where the tradition says this is where Jesus knelt. Sweat drops, great drops of like blood of sweat. Only Luke tells us that, by the way. He's interested in that kind of physiological detail. And it's here that we have this interesting connection with Psalm 42. That's the reason for the deer on top of the church, both looking toward the cross. It says the deer pants for the water. In certain places in that psalm it says things like, why are you cast down, O my soul? And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus tells His disciples, my soul is exceedingly troubled even unto death. Yeah? Well, what is it exactly that He's struggling with here? Every one of us want to go to heaven, don't we? Most of us, though, don't want to die. Jesus wanted to do the will of God more than anything else in His life. He taught us to pray it in Matthew chapter 6. Your kingdom come, your will be done in my life, even as it's done in heaven. That's His heart's desires, to do the will. My bread, He says in the Gospel of John, my food is to do the will of the Father. But when He gets here, He prays 3 different times, Father, if it be your will, what is it? Let this cup. What's the cup? The cup is drinking the wrath of God upon Himself, and taking all of that guilt and responsibility onto Himself as He dies a sacrificial death. All right, well, He's willing to do that, but He says, but if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. If it be your will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. So, throughout His ministry, whether it's in Galilee or here, and you've got a handout on this, Jesus and His use of geopolitical boundaries. When He brings a healing, or He does a teaching, or He violates the Sabbath or whatever, and a situation heats up where He is, He will jump boundaries into another person's geopolitical domain. Say, for example, from Herod Antipas over into his brother Philip's territory. Let things die down, then he comes back and resumes his ministry. He's done this now. He's extended his ministry for 3.5 years. In doing so, he's been able to deliver a body of teaching that still holds us in good stead. We call that the New Testament, or especially the parts that are printed in red in our Bibles as the words of Jesus. He's also trained a group of disciples that will carry on his work. Yeah? And we stand in that stream, and we're continuing to carry on his work. And then a third thing is he has brought the kingdom of God into a whole new developmental stage. It's been around for a long time. It's been growing. Sometimes it's been latent, but he has brought that thing to a whole new developmental stage. So he has basically completed his mission here. The kingdom is grounded and rooted. The kingdom has leadership. He's finished his ministry and trained his disciples. He's left behind an authoritative body of material. But now he comes to a point where he's been playing this geopolitical game for 3.5 years, and he's gotten really good at it. The question now is, like with David, do I gain the kingdom by my own hand, or do I wait for God to bring it in his time and in his own way? And so Jesus is faced here in the garden with a really difficult choice. Do I cut and run? Do I extend my life, my kingdom, my relationship with these wonderful guys that I've shared fellowship with for these 3.5 years? Or do I stay here and face the music? Now, if you'll read all 4 of the Gospels, and you have to get the full meal deal, and especially the Gospel of John, you know, the one that's the least historical, quote unquote, according to the critics. Read the Gospel of John. There is a contingent sent out to arrest him. They come from the Temple Mount. It's possible, because this is the temple vanguard. These are temple guards under the charge of the guy who is second to the high priest in authority. It's possible that they come out of the Golden Gate. If they don't, then they come around from the south side, and they come this way. Either way, it's nighttime. It's completely dark outside. This hill behind you, sloping up to the precipice, the top of the Mount of Olives, is full of people who are camping because it's Passover. Every little encampment has its own campfire. For this reason, it's not just Jesus and his disciples. This place is full of pilgrims for Passover, the festival. For this reason, this vanguard has to have a guide. We know of him as Judas. His name was Judah, possibly Judah Ish-Sikariot, Judah the man of the short daggers. He's always closely associated with Simon the Zealot. They're always paired together when the lists of disciples show up in the Gospels. So Judas is supposed to come and show him this group, this arresting party, exactly where Jesus is. That explains the need for a guide. If it was just one campfire, you just go out and arrest the people that are at that camp. But this place is full of pilgrims, and therefore full of camps and full of campfires, all the way up the slope of the Mount of Olives. So Judas comes leading this group. These are not Roman soldiers. Every Jesus movie I have ever seen in the history of my miserable existence has always pictured this arresting party as having Roman armor, a Roman helmet on, and they look like they're clean shaven. They're Roman soldiers. These are not Roman soldiers. These are the temple guard under the charge of the high priest and his lieutenant, the second in command. So they come to arrest Jesus, and whether they come around the south side or whether they come from the Golden Gate, it's at night. And according to, read all 4 of the Gospels, they're carrying weapons and they're carrying torches. So this is like flashlights. It's like playing flashlight tag when we were kids. You can see these guys coming for at least 15 to 20 minutes away. That means that Jesus has got a 15 to 20, depending on how fast, how big the group is and how fast they're walking, possibly even a half an hour head start. Jesus could easily have cut and run, been over the precipice, the ridge of the Mount of Olives. Then where is he? He's in the wilderness. There's nobody back there to tell on him. You know, like he went that way, not in the wilderness. Remember, wilderness is a place where people don't grow stuff and where people don't live. It's kind of deserted land. It's the realm of the shepherd. So if Jesus just gets over the precipice, he knows the way very well. Triumphal entry, going back and forth every day. He knows the way very well. He could have done this. He could have extended his ministry. It's possible that he'd have never been caught. Remember David in the wilderness? He never got caught by King Saul. Now the son of David could have done the same thing, but instead of cutting and running, the son of David stayed and faced the music. Are you happy he did? Aren't you thankful that he did? It meant great sacrifice. He'd seen crucifixion. The Roman world was full of it, sometimes crucifying upward of 6,000 people at one time we have record of. Crucifixion was common. I used to think when I was a kid, man, this is something that they thought up to do to Jesus because they just hated him that much. That's just a child thinking based on, you get bits and pieces in church and you try to put the collage together and it actually is kind of a strange looking picture. They didn't really hate him, they just wanted to get rid of him because they didn't want to have to fight battles that would result from a rebellion, right? From a war. I think that while we're here in the Garden of Gethsemane, I think it's appropriate for us to give careful consideration about not just the physical price that was paid, but that psychological price. Sweat drops like blood. And then the arrest and the imprisonment and the scourging and the humiliation. And finally, ultimately, after all of that and hours of this that went on, there's the actual crucifixion itself that went on from 9 until 3. And so it all starts, though, with a decision. We used to sing this old hymn, I surrender all, and the world behind me, the cross before me. That's not a new thought. Paul was saying, I want to urge you, brothers, Romans 12, by God, the mercies of God, present your bodies as living sacrifices. You see, every one of us, we each have our individual Gethsemane that we've got to go through. The unfortunate part is Jesus only had to make that decision once. The arrest, the imprisonment, the scourging, and the crucifixion took care of the rest of the process. We have to make that decision every day. Will I submit? Will I bow my knee to the will of the Father? And it has to be on a daily basis. That's the reason why we have in the Gospel of Luke, Luke tells us this version of what Jesus said. If anyone would follow after me, if anyone would be my disciple, he has to take up his cross daily. Luke has that additional word in there. It's an everyday decision. It comes into play when we get into an argument with our spouse or with someone at work. It comes into play when in a sudden burst of anger, we rush to discipline our children. It comes whenever we're dealing with somebody out in public trying to do some kind of a business deal and we feel like we're getting short-sheckled, yeah? It comes at rush hour when we're trying to get home before the storm hits and someone cuts us off. What I'm saying is it's constantly finding its way into places in our lives when we are the most vulnerable, and it's at that moment that we are in the crucible. It's in that moment that we are on the pounding place of the blacksmith. We've got to make that decision. It's right there at that point that we've got to decide, will I bow my knee to the lordship of Jesus, or am I going to take back and reassert mastery over my own life? Will we take the cross life, or will we take the self-assertion life? I'm going to give you one more point, and then I think that we're done at this point. Jesus has he's faced with two programs of kingdom building, and he's seeing it all around him lived out. in different people's lives. One way of kingdom building is by the force of the sword. He has a disciple whose name is Simon the Zealot. He's got another one whose name is Judas, maybe the man of the short daggers. Here in the Garden of Gethsemane, they try to defend him. Look, Lord, here are two swords. And Peter cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. And Jesus says, put your sword away, because those who live by the sword are destined to die by the sword. This is one way of kingdom building. That's self-assertion. Have we done that in our own lives? I know I'm guilty of it. Building my own kingdom my own way. Building my own kingdom not by submission, not by servanthood, but by self-assertion. Have we done that? Yes, we have. Well, Jesus is calling on us to die to that. To die to that program of kingdom building. And instead to live to a kingdom building that comes through submission, through submitting your will to the Father. That's what he taught in the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of his ministry. Now that's what he's living out at the end of his ministry. And that is, he is bowing his knee to the will of his Father. Nevertheless, not my will be done, but yours be done. That's an everyday decision. That's a sometimes moment by moment decision that you and I have to make. And I'll tell you this, in the moment that we decide, I will bow the knee, I will take the lesser position, I will be servant to this person who is bothering, irritating, afflicting me, who's wanting to usurp my authority or take something that's mine. I will die to myself, and I will instead choose the position of servant. And that's the way that Jesus, that's his kingdom building program, is not by self-assertion, but by sublimation of his will to the will of the Father. And I'll tell you this, that's the way the kingdom goes forward in our lives as well. In our personal lives, as well as everybody that our lives affect from that moment on when we make that decision. That's the way the kingdom comes, is when his will is done here, even as it is there.